Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Today, we're asking what is an O.A.P? An O.A.P is an old age pensioner. Now, we never say the word O.A.P. We always spell out the acronym an O.A.P. And this is how we refer to older people. It may be a pensioner in receipt of government benefits, but it might just be an older person who looks a little bit frail. Frail just means maybe not as fit as once they were. An old age pensioner. That's how we talk about older people, particularly those who are receiving the government state pension and are aged around 50, well, actually, no, 60, 65, yes. I think 65 is the earliest date these days you can receive the government benefit. Now, there's a headline in our newspaper today that talks about the rise of OAP shoplifters. Now, as I mentioned the other day on this podcast, shoplifting is kind of a big thing in the UK now. You go to a shop, you don't want to pay, you lift what you want, and you leave. Now, people do this for a number of reasons. One is because they know that the police aren't going to get there quick enough if they even make the effort. And the other is that you're not going to get stopped. Now, some shops do actually try to catch shoplifters. I know my local shop, when there's shoplifters, what they do is they actually catch the people, hold them there, and that forces the police to arrive quickly. Because if they do nothing, they know that the police won't act. So shoplifting, when you take something without paying for it, is kind of a big deal here now. But what is an even bigger problem is the OAPs who are shoplifting. Now, as I mentioned a few days ago, there is an opinion that the people who shoplift aren't doing this because they need to. They're not poor people. It's just they don't care. It's just a habit. They know the police aren't coming, so why should they pay? It seems to be a kind of an attitude now. Many shops have employed security guards to make sure this doesn't happen. But obviously, a lot of shops are losing a lot of food, so they're not trying anymore to just call the police. They're employing their own security. Now, when an OAP shoplifts, it's a bigger problem because nobody really wants to stop an OAP stealing. And it says here that they're stealing for personal use. That really is to do with the cost of living. They're not stealing to resell anything. So we're going to read through this story. It says here that there's a big rise in OAP shoplifters. It says they've interviewed a man who runs a convenience store in Croydon, South London, and he's saying that OAPs come to his shop and they steal for personal use, not for resale. And this is to do with the cost of living. And the man they interviewed says, we get pensioners, OAPs, they normally steal tins of meat, canned pork or ham, and fish. We don't prosecute them, we just take them aside and say, we know you're shoplifting. If you want to pay us later, it's fine. It comes after figures show 301 people over 60 were arrested by the police shoplifting, which is up 8% in 6 years. Let me read that again. It comes after figures show 301 people over 60 were charged with theft from shops, up 8% in 6 years. But it doesn't say what period that was for. Was that 301 people over a year, over 2 years? I don't know. They also interviewed someone who works for Tesco in South London. And he said, if I see someone older leaving the store and the alarm rings, because you know they have those security tags, I would find it very hard to stop them. So it looks like if you're an OAP, an old age pensioner, people are easier about this than they would be if you were young, because they would become very difficult and would arrest you immediately or at least apprehend you. A campaigner for older persons, older people, she said, if you don't have enough cash to buy basic food and items, you may be driven to take extreme measures. Yeah, I can see that that would be a problem. Although I don't think older people are that poor, are they? I mean, these days, I mean, they're putting forward the idea here that somehow it's more excusable for OAPs to shoplift. I'm not sure if I agree with that or not, to be honest. I know here it is a big problem, but I don't know what they do with shoplifters here. I know that the shop will apprehend you, but if you're older, I don't know how they treat you. I know that the law doesn't recognize any difference. I mean, a crime is a crime, but why you do that crime is something that's taken into consideration when they decide what to do with you, you know? So, yeah, very interesting, isn't it? So, yeah, OAP, old age pensioners who seem to be shoplifting so they can survive. I know there's all kinds of laws to protect OAPs from certain things, but if they do a crime, then they get treated the same as everybody else. In fact, the other day, a panicking OAP caused chaos by driving down a busy road for 23 miles in the wrong direction. Motorists had to brake and swerve their cars to avoid hitting 85-year-old James Andrews after he got very confused by using different roads on the motorway. When police managed to stop the retired miner before he caused a tragedy, he explained that he was feeling a bit confused. Horrified drivers braked and swerved to avoid a head-on collision, and he narrowly missed other vehicles after getting a little bit confused on the roads. He was taken to court, and they understood that he was an OAP, and he was from this area where I currently am. And I think that was taken into consideration. It had been a frightening experience for him as well, because he had been visiting his brother somewhere else. So he was arrested and interviewed that day, and it took 2 years for that case to get to court. So this wasn't recent. The court case was recent, but him doing this wasn't. So he admitted dangerous driving. He was told to pay £730 in fines and costs, and was banned for a year, prohibited for a year from driving. So banned and prohibited are synonyms. So there we are. That's just an example of how the law doesn't really treat you differently if you commit a crime. But obviously, if you are older and there's reasons why you've done this, they will look at your age and your circumstances, yes. But yeah, I've only ever seen an OAP shoplift once, and it was a really weird thing. Now, this was many, many years ago. I was a child, well, teenager, yeah, teenager. And I was in a supermarket, and there was an old lady in front of me. I mean, when I say old, I mean, I was 15, so she must have been at least 50. You know, when you're younger, you tend to think of people being old when they're not. So she must have been 50, 60, maybe even older. But for me, she just looked old, okay? As, you know, in the eyes of a 15-year-old. And she was in front of me, waiting to be served at the checkout. And in those days, of course, we didn't have self-checkouts. And while the cashier, you know, the shop assistant, was not scanning, but keying in the prices, because in those days you couldn't even scan food. The prices had to be entered manually on a cash till. So while the cashier was doing that, the shop assistant, this woman started talking to me, and she said, "Oh, you know, you look very much like my son." And I thought, "Oh, okay, yeah, thank you for that." And she said, "Yeah, but sadly he died." And I thought, "Oh, that's quite sad." So I didn't really say anything. I just smiled and said, "Sorry to hear that, you know." And she said, "Yeah, could you just do something for me as I'm leaving the shop? It would bring back a lot of memories if you could just say goodbye, Mum." Now, she looked like a really sweet old lady. Okay, there was nothing criminal looking about her. So, you know, you have to make these quick decisions, and it was the 1980s after all. So I said, "Sure, okay, why not? No problem." So she got all of her bags. I said loudly, "Goodbye, Mum," and she vanished into the busy streets, of course, never to be seen again, ever. And the shopkeeper looked at me and said, £25, 50, please. And I said, that's not my stuff. And she said, "Yeah, but it's your mum's stuff. I heard you saying goodbye, Mum." And I said, "No, no." asked me to do that. And then there was a big problem with this, of course, because they didn't believe me, so they got the store manager. And of course, they soon discovered that I was a 15-year-old boy, and it was clear that I wasn't a criminal either. I was one of these fresh-faced, freckled teenagers who looked like a complete nerd. And I even had hair in those days, so I was completely honest, of course. And yeah, they spoke to me for a little while, and then they called my parents, and then they called the police, and it was all very embarrassing. But this wasn't the first time this woman had done this. She apparently has done this a lot. You know, she says to the person behind her, "You look like my son, but my son died." Yada yada. And then whoever's there usually feels sorry for her. And as I said, goodbye, Mum. Of course, everything goes wrong because that's her escape. Yeah, so she was an OAP. But dreadful story, that, isn't it? That someone would do that to a child. I don't think they could do it now. Well, I can't imagine doing that to anyone. Although, maybe if you find a young person who is a little bit innocent, although younger people these days are probably much more streetwise than I was in those days. Anyway, well, that's my story. So that's it from me today. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And remember, if you find an O.A.P on the street, don't be afraid to smile because many of them are very, very lonely here in the UK as well. So that's it. See you soon. Bye.